So today we're going to talk about 10 retro underrated horror movies that I recommend that you check out for the Halloween season. Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel, everybody. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for dropping by. And this is another early morning shoot for me. So I'm making some coffee. The Cobwebs Coffee Club is in full effect. And before I get into these recommendations, I want to go ahead and define those words. So for retro, the movie just has to have come out before the 2000s, at least the 1990s. However, I will tell you for this list, all of these movies are the 1980s and back, so we're staying pretty retro today. And my definition of underrated is less than 10,000 logs on Letterboxd. Now, I absolutely love Letterboxd. I am an avid user of it. It's the barometer that I prefer using for like what's the popularity of a movie and such like that, more than IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes. But I will tell you, while less than 10,000 is the rule, 7 out of 10 of these have less than 5,000. All right, let's set this coffee aside and let that brew for a bit and talk about my number 10, because I ranked these from my lowest recommendation to my highest recommendation, but obviously these are all recommendations, and that is Hell's Trap from 1989. So this is a Mexican 80s slasher film about a couple of guys who are rivals. They're always doing these contests to try to decide who is the best, and when one of them is a sore loser, he challenges the other one to go out camping in the woods and try to find a bear, because there was a recent fatal bear attack in that area, and whoever can kill the bear is going to come out on top. However, of course, when they go out into the woods, they find a lot more than they bargained for. So I just checked this movie out on this brand new Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray. This actually just got released by them last month, and it's not available on streaming yet, but usually Vinegar Syndrome stuff shows up on places like Tubi and even Shudder pretty soon. But I do recommend this Blu-ray because I enjoyed this movie a lot. Now, Vinegar Syndrome gets a reputation for just releasing a lot of schlocky, low-budget 80s slashers, and that's not quite fair because they release a lot of different kinds of stuff, but this is one of their schlocky, low-budget 80s slashers, but it's a good one. I've really been enjoying Mexican films lately, and this is another example of that. Now, there are 3 things I really like about this movie. Number 1, the cast is actually really well defined. They're not boring. You've got a main couple that are very likable. They've got this friend named Charlie who is super lovable. I mean, Charlie is awesome. He always comes through. And then this rival of our main character is super unlikable, and he's really well drawn for just all of the things that make him terrible and why you're kind of rooting for him to die. And then he's got a friend that comes. There's a couple of girlfriends. The women are incredibly beautiful in this, and you know, that never hurts. But then my second reason I really like this is the killer is actually pretty awesome. You can see him right there on the cover of the Blu-ray, and it looks like he's got some Freddy Krueger gloves, and he does. He's kind of a mix of Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, and Rambo, because what he is an ex-soldier who was never able to let go of the war and has gone crazy and thinks everyone is his enemy out in the woods. And he wears this blank face mask, kind of like Michael Myers, but differentiated enough because he also wears long blonde hair, and that's a pretty unique look. And he does wear giant knives on his hands, which is why people think he's a bear when they find the bodies. And one thing that I love about him beyond just his super creepy look is he is a slasher who will kill people by any means necessary. He will pull out any possible trick to slaughter you. And then the movie is just tense. It's a genuinely intense thriller with some good out in the woods atmosphere. I thought this was really good. For number 9, let's talk about some Hammer horror with Kiss of the Vampire. So this is about a couple on a road trip across Europe, and wouldn't you know it, their car breaks down and they now have to go to the local hotel to stay there. But while they're there, the local super rich guy of the village who lives up in the mansion on the mountaintop invites them over for dinner. They meet him and his family and soon find out that maybe they are a part of a cult of vampires. So this movie's kind of a special case for a Hammer vampire film because they had a big series of Dracula movies. They also made this trilogy of vampire films called the Karnstein trilogy. I love those movies. And this is a rare vampire film for them that doesn't fit into either of those categories. It's just a one-off. It came out in 1963, which is kind of my favorite period for Hammer, that like early to mid 60s. And this is just a really good and really cozy little period piece vampire film. It's very similar to Dracula Prince of Darkness in that it's about people out on a road trip and they have to come and stay at the local castle and all that kind of stuff, but In some ways, this movie might actually be a little bit better than Dracula Prince of Darkness, although I'm not totally sure I believe that, but it's close. Because the characters, I think, are a little bit more well-drawn here and more charming. I really like this main couple. They're played by a couple of semi-Hammer regulars. You'll see them in movies like The Reptile and The Phantom of the Opera. But the vampire here is played by Noel Willman, and he's really good, very smooth, charming, but always creepy. And it's really fun how his whole family is also vampires. That's right, a family of Draculas.
A whole family of Draculas.
And the cult angle and how they're sucking in the wife and gaslighting the husband that he never even had a wife is really unsettling, actually. And it has an awesome ending, an ending that was actually supposed to be a part of one of their earlier Dracula films, Brides of Dracula, but they weren't able to pull it off for that movie, so they used it here. And it involves conjuration, bats, and a pretty awesome way to kill off vampires. I own this movie on this Scream Factory Blu-ray, but it's also very available on streaming. You can check it out on free streaming services like Tubi and Plex as well. Hey, my coffee's done brewing. Okay, so let's talk about my number 8, which is another movie I just recently discovered through Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, and it is called The Culler from 1987. So this movie stars 2 actors. One, Madeline Smith, who is a young woman who is living in a small country house kind of out in the woods, and she's just cooking dinner, and a man shows up, played by Malcolm McDowell, who says his car has broke down, he needs to come in and use the phone, and the movie is them talking, interacting, and playing all these head games with each other. You watch the power dynamics switch back and forth between them, and it's this very intense thriller. Yep, another damn fine cup of coffee. And I think for most of the runtime of this movie, you're gonna think it's just a thriller. But if you do want a movie that is intense, that will make you uncomfortable, this movie is absolutely that. I mean, I love the performances from these 2 people. Malcolm McDowell, very good actor at playing creepy. He's done it a million times in his career. He does it very well here. Also, just charming enough when he needs to be. But man, Madeline Smith playing not just some random woman who's just at a house. This is a woman who is clearly not well, and figuring out what is going on with her is another thing that's creepy. You're not just trying to figure out who is this guy Malcolm McDowell, you're trying to figure out who the heck is she. But I do completely stand by classifying this as a horror film because it's got a twist at the end. A twist you will never see coming. I don't care who you are. If you tell me you saw it coming, I don't believe you. It's insane. And it very well places this, not just in the thriller camp, but in the full-on horror camp. I highly recommend this Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, but you can also watch it for free on the Roku channel, and I think it's on Apple TV Plus as well. Okay, we love 1970s horror around the Cobwebs channel, so let's get into the 70s and talk about The Haunting of Julia from 1977. So this movie stars Mia Farrow, and to set the stage for the film, I will tell you that it opens up with her husband, and her teenage daughter all sitting down for a normal breakfast, and her daughter starts choking on something. And the choking starts getting worse, and Mia Farrow starts panicking. She starts trying to figure out any way to possibly help her. The choking keeps going, and Mia Farrow tries to cut the stuck food in her throat out, and the daughter dies. And it is a horrific sequence. Like, it's probably the most horrific thing you're going to see in any of these movies I'm talking about here today. Very disturbing, especially because of Mia Farrow's performance and how well she communicates, being absolutely devastated and horrified. The movie then cuts ahead a little bit in the future. She's now left her husband because he's just not helpful to her through this grieving process, and he's just not a very good guy. So she goes out to start a new life on her own, deal with this grieving process, and she moves into a house that just might be haunted. So this is a classic British horror film that I wanted to see for a long time. I'd always heard it was really good, but it just wasn't really available for quite a while. And I'll tell you, it's still not available on streaming, but Scream Factory did release it on 4K recently, and I highly recommend the 4K because I think it's worth it to check out this movie, and it looks fantastic on 4K. This is a very dark-looking movie, and I feel like 4K always does a lot for dark films, just making everything crystal clear. You can see everything so well. This also goes by the alternate title Full Circle as well. And yeah, yeah, it's a British film, so Mia Farrow's putting on a fake British accent, which is a little odd, but she does a fantastic job. She's excellent in this movie. And while I'll say I never found this movie scary, it definitely has some creepy sequences, some creepy atmosphere. And I will say I wouldn't just check out this movie just because you like horror movies. I would also ask yourself if you like 70s dramas, because for the most of the runtime, this really just feels like a 70s drama, but a good one, an interesting one with a very sympathetic lead performance. And I really like 70s dramas, so that worked for me. It's very good in that aspect, but it's got just enough creepy horror when you need it. Dark, spooky, haunting sequences. Mia Farrow trying to figure out what is going on with this ghost in my house. And it's got a devastating end credit sequence that feels very ahead of its time. It feels like the kind of thing you'd see like in a modern A24 film, you know, when they're trying to be artsy. But for the 70s, it's a pretty interesting. I know it's weird to recommend a movie based on the end credits, but it's pretty wild. I do recommend this movie for sure. All right, let's go way back in time to the 1930s and talk about The Cat and the Canary from 1939. So this movie has a classic premise about a bunch of people who get gathered at a spooky old mansion way out in the middle of nowhere because somebody died and there's a giant inheritance and a bunch of people are invited to read the will. So many different murder mysteries have done that, and this movie is actually a remake of a silent film, which is then an adaptation of a play. So this is a story that's been done many different times, but this is the only version that I've seen, to be honest with you. But this is a meta horror comedy. It's not so much meta about movies, but about murder mystery radio plays, which is really fun. It's this little time capsule. But even though, you know, most of us don't listen to radio plays today, we know the tropes of classic murder mysteries. So the meta aspects totally work for us. This stars Bob Hope and Paulette Goddard. Now, Bob Hope, a classic comedian. He's very funny, very charming in this movie. And Paulette Goddard, she was actually married to Charlie Chaplin at the time when she made this, and she co-starred with Chaplin in Modern Times. And by the way, Charlie Chaplin called this movie one of the best comedies he's ever seen. Granted, he's a little bit biased because of Paulette Goddard, but still, that is some high praise. And I love Paulette Goddard in this movie. She is so cute and charming and beautiful. Like, I just love her. She's so much fun to watch in this movie. But this is just a classic murder mystery setup with a lot of good laughs and more legit horror content than I was expecting. A little bit of a proto-slasher type killer going around killing people one by one. It's not a haunting movie. You might expect that because the old dark house setup. Definitely a murder mystery movie. But a lot of fun. A lot of great lines, very charming characters. The whole cast, the whole ensemble is just fantastic. I highly recommend this movie for a dark, spooky night when it's storming outside. You just want to cuddle up with a blanket and watch something fun to make you laugh, but give you good spooky vibes. I can think of few movies that are better for that than The Cat and the Canary. Okay, another thing you guys know I love here on the Cobwebs channel, that is horror anthologies. So we're going to talk about a horror anthology right now that is like criminally underseen. And when I watched this movie, I had like no expectations because I never heard like anybody talk about it. And it blew me away. This is, let's see, 1989, After Midnight. So this is kind of an interesting horror anthology because it opens up with a bunch of students who go over to the house of one of their professors. He's like a professor of like folklore or something like that, to hear scary stories that he has to tell. So he tells them some scary stories. Interesting thing about these stories is none of them have any supernatural elements. This is a totally non-supernatural horror anthology, but it totally works because it's got plenty of scary stuff in there. It's got murder. It's got a pack of wild, ravenous dogs. There's this one segment that it's a classic premise that I think we've talked about several times on this list, where people's like car breaks down. They have to go up to the spooky mansion, try to find a phone to call a tow truck or something. And what happens to that mansion is crazy. It's got a twist that might tick you off a little bit, but I thought was, I just appreciated that they went there. It's just got some really good segments. I honestly think there isn't a bad segment in the whole movie. And one thing that I really like that this does, I love it when horror anthologies do this. It's very rare. Is the wraparound becomes the final segment. So the story of these students going over to their teacher's house to hear scary stories, it turns into the final horror story, which I thought this movie handled that beautifully. After Midnight is just a totally solid horror anthology. There's no weak spots, and I highly recommend checking out, especially if you love a good collection of spooky stories. At number 4, man, I love this movie. This is William Castle's Homicidal from 1961. So to set up this movie, it opens up with a beautiful blonde woman who goes to a hotel and she has a very creepy conversation with the bellboy. And she tells him she will pay him $2,000 if he will run off with her that night, marry her, and then get it immediately annulled. Now, why is she asking this? He has no idea. He does not understand, but he needs the money and she's very beautiful, so he goes along with it. And the situation, of course, ends in homicidal activity, and the movie goes from there. So this movie has a very interesting, very close relationship with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. One thing a lot of people don't know is Alfred Hitchcock was actually inspired by William Castle to make Psycho. William Castle was a classic horror producer and director back in the 50s and 60s. He made a lot of like cheap, quote-unquote schlocky horror movies that were successful, made a lot of money. Movies like House on Haunted Hill, 13 Ghosts, The Tingler, stuff that's very iconic today. I love William Castle. He's like one of my favorite underrated horror directors. And Hitchcock saw William Castle getting all of the success off these cheap little horror movies, and he was like, I can do that. And he made Psycho, and my gosh, he could do it. He made one of the best horror movies ever. And then Castle saw that success and said, well, I can do that. And he made Homicidal, which is very much his homage to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It has a lot of similarities, but definitely differentiates it enough. Actually, Time Magazine called this one of the best movies of the year and said it was better than Psycho. So check the movie out to decide for yourself. Now, one fun thing for me about watching this movie is I had never watched Psycho and not known the ending. I saw Psycho from a very young age, and even so, I already knew how it was going to end. Like, it's impossible not to absorb that movie through cultural osmosis, so I never had that experience with it, but I still love the movie. It doesn't really matter. But I got that experience with Homicidal. I did not know the ending to this. And the ending kind of blew my mind. Like, there's an element of this movie. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's an element that I just thought was so odd, and I just could not put my finger on it. Like, what is going on with this? And when it gets to the reveal, blew my mind. I was like, holy cow, I cannot believe you hid that from me so well. And also William Castle, he's great for like little gimmicks in his movies. And about 15 minutes before the ending, a timer comes on screen that says, hey, if you're too scared to see the end of this, you can leave and get your money back. But when this timer ends, you're gonna have to watch the chilling climax of Homicidal. So fun. Love those kind of ridiculous, spooky Halloween time vibes. This movie's got it in spades. At number 3 is a movie I actually just checked out for the first time, and it is called Mill of the Stone Women from 1960. So this movie is about a young scholarly student who comes to this remote village of this professor of sculpting who lives in this mill, and he goes to like help him with research and work and such like that. But he finds that sculptor has made a wax figure house of horrors, and there's something really creepy going on with his beautiful daughter. That's kind of all I want to give away for you. And when I talk about like a House of Horrors wax figure show, you might be immediately associating this movie with House of Wax, which is definitely a fair comparison. But this movie kind of ramps up the spooky factor because it's a carousel. It is a carousel, like amusement park ride kind of thing, where these figures of horrors throughout history, like a woman, I think it's supposed to be Joan of Arc, tied to a wooden post, like getting burned alive, is like this wax figure just going along this carousel with this little music, and it's so eerie. I mean, spooky is the best word I can use to describe this movie. This movie is spooky from start to finish. It's an Italian Gothic film, actually not directed by Mario Bava. Usually the only Italian Gothics a lot of people know are from Mario Bava, but it might be like less slow than a lot of Bava's films. Like, it moves pretty well. It's pretty interesting. I like the characters. They're definitely likable enough. I like our lead guy. He's kind of a Gregory Peck looking guy who's just this total goody two shoes, always kind of trying to do the right thing, but getting seduced by this professor's daughter, who's definitely a Barbara Steele type actress. Very beautiful, very creepy. I thought she was excellent in this. And this is like one of the most beautiful horror movies I've seen in a long time. Jaw-dropping, like the bright, vivid colors made before Mario Bava had made any of his color Gothic films. Insanely gorgeous film from start to finish. I just can't believe how they made this movie look. I own this movie on this gorgeous chunky box release from Arrow Video. It's got like a booklet and a poster in here. It's awesome. I got it on sale for $20, but it is available on a lot of different streaming services like Arrow's own streaming service. service. So highly accessible movie, and man, I totally recommend it. It is, if you like old gothic horror films and you haven't seen this, like, you gotta check it out. A must see. I'm so glad I finally saw it. But my top two are absolutely my top two recommendations. This first one is Madman from 1989. I feel like we got a lot of movies from 1989 here. This movie is about a young, struggling actress who works in a bookstore who is obsessed with old vintage pulp horror novels. And there's this one that is always eluding her called Madman that she's trying to track down because she can't just go on eBay and buy it, right? She's got to find it in a store. And it does show up at her doorstep very mysteriously. She starts reading it and starts to suspect that some murders going on around town are because the killer from the book has escaped the pages and is now going out to be real and kill people. So this movie is directed by a guy named Tibor Takacs, and he also directed The Gate, which is a classic 80s film that a lot of people love, but I gotta say, between the two, Madman is the better movie. Now, here's what I love about it. It has such a classic pulp novel noir kind of a feel to it. I mean, it takes place in the 1980s present day, but whenever it cuts to these fantasy sequences that the lead character has while she's reading the books, it cuts to like a 1950s period. So I really like all that with like the 50s music and stuff because I love that aesthetic. But also the whole movie, even though it takes place in the 80s, they keep this very classic old-fashioned kind of feel with the costume design and the set design. So it's just got this pulp noir 50s kind of feel to it, which I love. But also, if you want to watch a movie with, because we talk about movies based on atmosphere a lot. I love doing that. If you want to watch a movie with like old bookstore atmosphere surrounded by old books, where a character is running away from a killer and falls down the stairs down an actual cascade of old books that are all falling with her. If you want to watch that kind of thing, which I do, I love bookstores, you know, like the look of old vintage horror novels. Like it's so cool. It's so nostalgic. Then this movie is for you. Like the atmosphere is fantastic. But the lead actress is actually Jenny Wright. And a lot of people know her as the lead girl from Near Dark, the vampire movie. And she's excellent here as well. Really, really like this actress. I wish she had done more. And the killer in this that escapes the pages of the book is so creepy. Like, holy cow. He is pulled off so well. He is a guy who, out of love for a woman, cut all of his features off and is now going around killing people and cutting their features off and replacing his with theirs. And like, he just gets to look more and more horrifying as the movie goes. Like, they pulled him off so well. He's so creepy. And there's even like a cool stop motion creature in this movie as well. The sky's the limit for the imagination of this movie. It's got so much going on. I have it on the Scream Factory Blu-ray that is unfortunately out of print, but you can stream it for free on the Roku channel. But easily at my number one, this is Soul Survivor from 1984. So this is about a woman who was on a plane that crashed. And everyone died on the plane. Everyone except her. She is the sole survivor. And she is now dealing with the psychology of that, of being the only person to survive this and wondering if she deserves it. Does she have survivor's guilt? And she starts to figure out that maybe she was supposed to die on that plane. And fate, death, however you want to say it, is coming for her to correct that mistake. Now, if you heard that premise and thought, well, that sounds exactly like the Final Destination movies. Yeah, they basically took the exact plot from Soul Survivor and turned it into that 2000s horror franchise. And I actually like the Final Destination movies, especially 3 of them. And but none of them are near as good as Soul Survivor. This is a 5-star horror movie. I think it's perfect. I think it's incredible. The sense of dread this movie builds is astounding to me. Like, it is such a creepy movie. It is so atmospheric. It was filmed in California, but I don't know. They just created this like rainy day and also rainy night atmosphere. There's a lot of rain in this movie. It's like a perfect movie to watch on a rainy morning. A friend of mine actually said that to me, or he put it in a Letterboxd review. I can't remember. So I'm kind of quoting him, but a perfect rainy morning movie. I mean, so atmospheric. But Final Destination isn't the only movie that I think took inspiration from this. Also, It Follows, because why she's figuring out that she thinks death is coming for her is she keeps seeing these dead people just standing off at the distance, staring at her, maybe walking towards her very slowly. It's so creepy, and it is straight out of It Follows. So if you thought It Follows was creepy, you owe it to yourself to see Soul Survivor. But not only the creepiness and the dread and the atmosphere, The characters are great. I love this lead character. She's actually really fun to watch. She's like very sarcastic and witty, and she starts this romance with her doctor, who's like this very like button-up shirt, prim and proper kind of guy. So watching her kind of free spirit, sarcastic attitude melding with his kind of stuck-up kind of attitude is really fun. They have a lot of great conversations. The dialogue in this movie is fantastic. Like, I just love to listen to people talk. I love watching their romance develop, and the fact that it's so creepy and is such a sense of dread, and it's like this secret zombie movie almost, is just icing on the cake for me. This movie is awesome. It's directed by Tom Eberhardt, who also directed another one of my favorite 80s movies, The Night of the Comet. And while it's very hard to get on physical media, I have this old like foreign release. I don't even know what country this is from. It also has an out-of-print Code Red Blu-ray. It's very available on streaming. You can watch it on Shudder. You can watch it on a lot of streaming services. So that's my list of underrated retro horror movies for you to check out this season. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your recommendations down in the comments below. I would love to get some more cool movies to check out. And if you enjoyed this, definitely check out this playlist right down here with some other ranking lists that I've done, as well as this video up here for more fun as well. And subscribe for more fun videos like this all through the Halloween season and even after. Thank you so much. Don't forget to have some fun today, and I'll see you next time.